Thanks for being here. I hope you're having an amazing day. If you didn't know, the channel just passed 10,000 subscribers. Woo! It's a major milestone that I'm delighted to celebrate with all of you, and in honor of that, I'm going to be answering as many of your submitted questions as I can. And without further ado, let's get started with the questions and the answers. So let's kick off with an easy one. Which part of the world are you from? I'm from South Africa, though I'm not entirely sure if my accent fits with other South Africans, since I've had people outside the country correctly guess that I'm from here, but I've also had people in the country ask me where I'm from, so yeah, it's a mystery to me. What specifically got you interested in the Paleolithic? Is it because it's the first stop on building a world, or is there something else about the era that calls to you? Honestly, it's largely the former. I wanted to play with the idea of evolving a single culture and location and start as far back as I could to a starting line that I could then use as a launch pad into the exercise. The only thing is that, well, there really isn't such a thing as a starting point when it comes to people. We're always in a state of in-betweens. And the more I work on the setting of Immortal and the hundreds of little things that make up a culture, the more I understand that. But oddly enough, I feel I'm so much more invested in the Paleolithic now that I've spent so long learning about it, more than I ever thought I would when I started. It's a funny world, isn't it? Next. What are your inspirations behind your art style? Are there specific artists or styles you're taking cues from, or is it more of a mixed bag of things? When I was still studying, one of my teachers said that you should steal like an artist. It's the idea that it's okay to be inspired and take little bits and pieces from as many people as you like to inform your own art and learn and grow with every little bit that you use. I'm a pretty strong believer in that mentality, so a lot of my art comes from a lot of different places, and my art style is very inconsistent because of it. Of course, a lot of my early inspirations were late 2000s anime, but as I got older, I started adding more stuff from Western cartoons, such as Gravity Falls and a little bit of Hilda, and while I tend to default to a more anime look, especially when I don't start off with a target style, I like to shift and change and mess around enough that I think I'm more a little good at a lot of styles rather than really good at one. Oh, what are your thoughts on To Your Eternity? I adored To Your Eternity when I read the manga a few years back. It lived rent-free in my head for a long time, and I would definitely accredit it with a big chunk of the early inspiration for Immortal, but hopefully I'll be able to differentiate Immortal enough to make it its own experience, separate from Yoshitoki's work, despite the main character's hair. I notice most of your characters are smaller, shorter, or skinnier. Will we see larger, taller, bigger characters in the future? Yes, absolutely. A big reason for the builds of the characters now is because they are nomadic hunter-gatherers, and typically the lifestyle is associated with slimmer and lankier builds. Once we hit the agricultural revolution and people start settling down into different lifestyles, we'll be able to work on creating more varied body types to hopefully be able to better represent a full range of different people. In the creative process of world building, what is the best starting point or foundation one should set up to begin constructing their world? Honestly, there isn't a one-size-fits-all way to start. I myself have started a lot of stories and worlds really differently from one another, but often I find one single point of inspiration. It could be a type of outfit or a character design, which is how Immortal actually first got started. It could be a specific character, a creature, a god, a building. If I find one thing that I make that inspires me so much that I want to build an entire world around it, just for an excuse to stay with that one design, then I pretty much know I've got my starting line. You could just zoom out little by little and build more of the world at a speed you're comfortable with until you're satisfied with your setting. Just remember that nothing has to be set in stone the second you make it. Sometimes I find out halfway through that the world I've made for the anchor actually changes the way I feel about it, and I don't really want to work on it anymore because of it. But if nothing's set in stone, then we can just change the factors around the anchor to be what we wanted them to be in the first. There's no rules. Just write something that you enjoy. Is this the first world building project you've done? And how long have you been world building for? How many previous worlds have you built? And can we have glimpses of those other worlds? I've written a lot of worlds and abandoned a lot more. Most of them I made around high school, some even back in primary school. You can't read those though. In all honesty, I would rather set myself on fire than put them on the internet. But in 2021, I had a gap year where I didn't have anything else to do but sit at home and draw. So in that time, I whipped up a webcomic that I worked on and updated full-time for the better part of a year. It's no longer something that I have the time or motivation to work on now, but you can still find it on Webtoons. It's called Rapture. But fair warning, the art you see in my videos now are much better than what I was capable of back then. I love it for what it was and how it helped me grow, but I do feel my skills as both an artist and hopefully a writer have greatly improved since then. Are you studying archaeology? No, unfortunately, though I've always kind of wanted to. I just never ended up pursuing history in my studies since I wasn't interested in recent history and instead ended up pursuing art as a career instead. But I do find the topic very fascinating, and all of my videos from this year were made in collaboration with Vincent, someone who is more informed and studying archaeology. So he's really been helping to ensure the video's facts are correct and informative. What other tribes could show up, and are you going to use any creatures of your own design? There will definitely be a lot of tribes that show up, but just one other group is planned to appear in the first arc, and the Neanderthal stand-ins will definitely be important after that. Of all your videos, why did YouTube recommend the video about rocks? I honestly think it's because it's not that attached to my other stuff. A lot of the other videos, especially the setting up a comic one and the speed paints, kind of need you to know a bit about Immortal and what I do already. As well as the fact that world building and writing is kind of niche on its own. So I think the videos that you can just jump into with no prior knowledge perform the best, like the rock video and to a lesser extent the map video. It'll be something for me to consider moving forwards, but I probably won't stop yapping about Immortal anytime soon. What inspired you to world build? What were/are your inspirations when it comes to world building? I mean, I've loved writing for as long as I could read, and around the same time, I also loved learning about mythology and history and the beliefs and cultures of other people that existed in their respective times with their respective ideologies, who had completely different social structures and systems and afterlife, who understood their world so differently from how we do ours. It's always fascinated me, and I've always wanted to understand how those people thought and acted and lived their ordinary day-to-days in ways that seem so fantastical to us now. And for me, that comes in the form of creating and exploring worlds that I can make on my own and create new people and cultures and worlds and try to simulate real human life. So in retrospect, I was probably always going to be into world building. As for physical media, the first video game I ever played was Skyrim, and it hit me hard in terms of how beautiful and massive the scope was for the world. I adored the Harry Potter series as a kid, which, okay, it's not that great now that I'm not a kid, but it really influenced me back then, as well as series like Wolf Brother and thousands of smaller fantasy books that I read as a kid in the library, which I can't even remember the names of now. There's also anime and manga like Attack on Titan, Tokyo Ghoul, the manga, not the anime, and even now I have completely fallen in love with Ryoko Kui's Dungeon Meshi. It's incredible. Like I said earlier, steal like an artist. So I get a lot of influence from a lot of different media, from all the way to my childhood up to today. What was your process for deciding the trends in social structures 50,000 years ago, since we have so little information on them today? I try to approach it like you would any other fantasy structure, with a bit of backing from real-world history. It helps to know a bit about modern hunter-gatherers too. For example, it was just as likely throughout history for hunter-gatherer nomads to work with an egalitarian social structure as it was for them to have a patriarchal one. And even today, it's the same. So knowing something as basic as that can influence a lot of other parts of the world. If the society is egalitarian, do they put the same emphasis on romantic relations, on child rearing? If they don't divide responsibilities based on gender as much, then are there different lines they draw elsewhere, like, for example, age? It's a bit like piecing together those conspiracy boards with bits and pieces here and there. But as much as we don't know about life back then, there is actually a lot that we do know, and that makes it a lot easier to fill in the gaps. Will there be villains, or will this just be a slice of life philosophical type of story? That's a great question. There will definitely be villains, hopefully good ones, later down the line, but I hope to be able to write Immortal as a world filled with moral greys rather than with strict black and white morals and villains that can be easily cast into the role of villains. Do you have a Discord server? Yeah, I do, but it's for patrons, I'm afraid. You're welcome to join for $1 a month, but I completely understand if that's not an appealing or viable proposition. How do you do your research? Is it the normal Google and guess? Yep, kind of. I tend to just do a bunch of Googling on whatever the topic is and read through as many articles as I can find and see where it takes me. I tend to gauge whether something is credible or not based on whether another source said the same or a similar thing, and would kind of base how much I believed a source on where I found it. For example, a paper on ResearchGate would be a lot more credible than a 24 News article from 2018. It served me okay in the beginning, but it's not the best method, and I definitely did make mistakes early on, like mixing up Neolithic and Paleolithic in my Setting a Comic 50,000 Years Ago video, even though that was probably the worst thing I could have screwed up while talking about a comic set in the Paleolithic. But it's fine, I'm getting better. And Vincent helps an insane amount with corroborating stuff I've heard and letting me know if there's something I missed, or just straight up teaching me entire concepts. You can thank him for the lithic video, but we can't all rely on him. So I recommend using Google Scholar, which filters out everything else and just shows peer-reviewed papers and more credible sources that are available online. What is Immortal about? What age is it set in? This could warrant its own short video, probably, but the quick rundown is that Immortal is an as-of-yet unreleased comic that starts 50,000 years ago in what would be 48,000 BCE. It's set in an alternate version of Earth with slight evolutionary, geographic, and planetary variations. It tells the story of Tala, a girl who, through a series of unfortunate events, becomes unable to die, and lives through the history of her world right up until the modern day. It focuses on the passage of time, the power struggles of and between both man and God, death, and, if I pull it off right, what it means to be alive. I see you have 2 continents on your world map, which look like Australia analogues. Any thoughts on what that part of the world looks like? That's a very cool question. I have some loose concepts for the people and society that will eventually reside there. As of when the comic starts, it will not be inhabited yet, but later on it'll be populated by a society that focuses a lot on water-based living and travel. It won't be a direct one-to-one society like the Aborigines native to Australia, though they will probably share some physical properties simply because geographically they'll be similar. What time periods will we be seeing, or how will it all be chunked up? So, we'll of course be running through human history at hyperspeeds for the first 30 or so thousand years, since nothing much changes technologically in that period. But we'll be taking stops between to focus on certain character and world moments, and once we get to the glacial maximum is where the fun can slowly begin to start. From there, we'll be moving through human history at a more or less steady pace. The structure should be something similar to an episodic anthology, with each arc focusing on a different point in time up until we reach the modern day. The structure should be something similar to an episodic anthology, wherein each arc focuses on a different point in time up until we reach the modern day, at which point we'll probably have to stop unless I can figure out how to see into the future between now and then. At least that's the plan for now, and I don't think it'll change, but the end is a very long way away for now. Have you ever studied or thought about modern hunter-gatherer tribes? I have looked into a few case studies when I'm unsure about certain topics for the nomads. I usually use South Africa's San nomadic people as a touchstone when working with culture and habits, with a bit of influence from an assortment of different groups from around the world. It's kind of tricky to get information on topics from these same groups, so the way I see it, it's kind of okay to pick from multiple sources to get a general understanding of the general lives of these hundreds of different cultures. I've noticed that for a lot of creative projects, the longer they take, the more likely it is that the creator will get bored and not finish it. How do you work on one project for such a long time? I used to be awful at keeping myself invested in story ideas. I think my shortest time is about a single afternoon before abandoning an idea. But at a certain point, you realize that that method isn't really getting you anywhere, and you have to change your approach to working on your stories if you want to reach any sort of end goal. I have to make sure that the story I work on is worth it to me, and put as much of myself into it as I can to make it something that is worth the time and effort. I got better as I got older, but the project I was working on before Immortal only had a lifespan of 4 months or so, and the one before it was Rapture. I'm not entirely sure where the switch flips and it turns from something that's disposable into a piece of yourself. Sometimes I do feel exhausted and I don't want to work on Immortal anymore, but I step back, take a breather, and I always get back into it. I don't really want to call it quits yet, even if in the moment it's all I want to do. And ultimately, it's because I feel I want to make a complete and finished story, to finally work on something to the very end. And to do that, I have to get further than concept art and rough drafts and world building. I'm sorry if that doesn't help anyone else in the same position. It's what I mean when I say that writing is a deeply personal process. I'm not sure how to help others in that way, because I'm not entirely sure how I got myself out of that headspace in the first place. How long do you intend Immortal to be? Do you have any idea how much time it will take to complete it? Honestly, I have no idea how long the final series is going to be. I know where I want to go and I have a sense of the pacing that will be needed to get there, but it's a bit tricky so early on to know, even though I've been working on it for a year. In all honesty, it could take me up to a decade to finish the whole thing. Unless I go at the pace I am now, then it'll take 100 years. How do you stay motivated when you research something and notice that something that is now a permanent fixture in your world is contradicted by basic science you just didn't know at the time? It's really tough when that happens, but that's why I try, emphasis on the try, to treat the world building like Play-Doh. One of the big things that kind of blew up the story I'd planned so far was that the size of Tala's little band was literally too small to effectively survive. Humans typically traveled in much larger bands of between 25 to 50 people, and well, that wasn't going to really fit with a lot of the major story points I had planned for the introduction of the comic and its themes, and I had to essentially rework the entire story's introduction to explain why their group is so small without upsetting the pacing and themes that were already in place. In fact, I'm still working on the second draft of that story, which leads us into the next big question. When will Immortal be out? When is the first issue going to drop? Will Immortal have a physical print when it's finished? And what's the plan for the future of the Immortal series and your channel? The 28th of April 2023 was the day I released my first long-form video, which means it's officially been 1 year of me making long-form videos. Later on in the year, I stopped, and I didn't kick the video making machine back up again until January of this year. The reason I stopped was because I started working full-time on top of what I was doing before, which was studying concept art part-time. I was overworking and burning myself out for a while there, and I couldn't even imagine finding the time or the energy to work on videos. I've found my limits for how much I can physically make in certain amounts of time, and currently that time is spent working either at my real job or working on Immortal, and the time I have to work on the comic is greatly eclipsed by the amount of time I spend working on videos about the comic. So I'm kind of in a very strange position now. Do I keep working on videos and pray I find the energy to work on the comic in between uploads? Do I stop making videos entirely and work on the comic even though the channel's been performing unimaginably well and I could be blowing my one chance at financing the project through it? I didn't think the lithic industry video would blow up the way it did. I didn't think I would be able to monetize the channel within the year, let alone this month. I want to be able to give you a real, tangible deadline for, at the very least, the pilot, but I'm still at a crossroads, wondering how to manage the expectations of all parties, and what I really want to do moving forwards. What, in your opinion, were the most enlightening facts about our ancestors that you have encountered? That people have fundamentally always been the same, really. Recently, we've been looking at human migration, and one of the most incredible things to draw up is migration maps over thousands of years. You can see how people moved for thousands of miles and kilometers over the course of entire lifetimes, and that each movement was motivated, was reasoned, that everywhere we drew a border, there was conflict and trade and merging and travel and peace and war. We've always been the same people doing the same things, and over thousands and thousands of generations, far more than what we can really visualize. Human history is so expansive. And everything from the first real settlements to now is just a small piece of that history. The only difference between the people from then and us now is that we're just doing the same things on a larger scale with more advanced tools. Not just war and violence, but finding communities, exploring beliefs, sharing art and what makes us happy. We're all just us. And that's kind of been the most incredible thing to discover. Sorry, I always have to put something sappy and preachy at the end. That's the rule. But here's one last one. The most important one, I'd say. Grilled cheese sandwich with mayo or butter or oil. It's butter all the way. It's what I was raised on, so I can't really imagine having it with oil or mayo. But you know what? Maybe I'll try it sometime just to confirm that butter's definitely the best. Sorry the video got heavy there at the end. I was trying to avoid it in all honesty, but I didn't manage it all, like at all. Thank you to Vincent one last time for all of your help, and to the wonderful patrons who are actively making this crazy little dream a reality. So many of you have joined since last month, and I couldn't be more grateful and blown away and in awe. So instead of getting sappy again, I think I'll just leave it here. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.